Aloha, I'm State Representative Cindy Evans, and welcome to my Now What, that I have an occasional opportunity to meet with people in the community, talk about important issues that are important to all of us statewide. It's my pleasure to be the state representative for North Kona, South Kohala on the Big Island. And today's topic is historic preservation. And we have a lot of great things coming up in this area. And my guest today with me is Kiersten Faulkner. And Kiersten is Executive Director of Historic Hawai'i Foundation. So join me in greeting Kiersten. Hi, Kiersten.
Thank you, Representative Evans. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, people I know in the audience don't know, but you know, I've had a history with you now for several years on this topic of historic preservation, and I've had the privilege of being the chair of the Heritage Caucus with Representative Corinne Ching, and it's been fun to talk to fellow legislators about this topic, and also it's been a real passion to get involved in a lot of the historic preservation issues. But I want you to kind of talk about the Historic Hawai'i Foundation.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I think a lot of people are very excited about Hawaii's history and heritage and the legacy that we enjoy today because of the activities and the preservation activities of previous generations. I'd like to thank you and the Heritage Caucus members for your leadership on this issue. Certainly, without good public policy and good legislative action, preservation would be a whole lot harder, so thank you for that. Historic Hawai'i Foundation is a nonprofit organization, and we're statewide. We've been around for 35 years, formed in 1974. And it's a membership organization, which means that it's a way to bring together a lot of different voices of people who are passionate about this issue. It's not so much that they're members because of what we can give them, as much as we're a way for all those voices to come together and say, this matters to us. Our history, our heritage, the legacy of these islands is important. So that's really what it's all about. We address it in a variety of different ways, but having that membership base is very important.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about is the development of the Historic Hawai'i Preservation Day here at the state capitol. It's been a lot of fun. I believe this year is the 6th year.
It's either the 6th or the 7th.
I know, it's hard to believe time passes.
Representative Ching, who you mentioned is a founder of the Heritage Caucus, was really the driving force behind this about 7 years ago. And through first her leadership, and then as you and others started to really get excited about this, it's grown in scope and scale and involvement until this year we're looking at probably the best ever. So the Preservation Awareness Day is a free public event at the state capitol on Wednesday, March 18th. So from 9 until 12 all morning, there's going to be exhibits from institutions, educational places, museums. Anyone who's interested and involved in history and heritage and preservation will be talking about what they do, why they do it, how people can get involved. So we're really inviting everyone to come down, participate in that, see for themselves what the different activities are.
Well, that kind of leads me into getting a little more personal and about why did you personally find historic preservation? So, I mean, obviously it's a passion, it's really attracted you, and maybe from your personal love and passion for it, you know, you can kind of share with us a little bit why is historic preservation so important?
Well, I do feel incredibly privileged and honored to be the Executive Director of Historic Hawai'i Foundation. And certainly that organization has brought together a lot of different people that come at it from different perspectives. As you mentioned, there's people who really love the places themselves, you know, the architecture, the natural heritage, the cultural landscapes, and those places speak to them. There are others who really get excited about the stories and the events and the people, the history side of preservation, and to say, well, what can we learn from the past, and what does that mean for us today, and how can we build on the good and maybe remember the bad but not repeat it, and have that educational side of history. What I love about historic preservation is where those two things intersect. So we have these amazing places here today, but they're a physical tie to the stories and the people of the past. I grew up in Colorado. I'm not originally from Hawaii, but when I learned of the places in Hawaii, the architecture in Hawaii, these amazing cultural landscapes, this very rich and varied history of Hawaii, it spoke to me. And to be a part of an organization that works to preserve those places, not just for ourselves, but for the future, was just an amazing opportunity.
It's interesting you come from Colorado. I went to the Capitol in Denver, and I actually went to talk to the Historic Preservation Division of the state, because I was looking at ways that we did things in Hawaii. Historic preservation, I actually introduced a bill. This was my first session 6 years ago. I introduced a bill. I didn't get a hearing. I talked to the chair of Water, Land, Ocean Resources, and he said to me, you know, this is really kind of a very bold initiative. Why don't you do a resolution? But basically what I was looking at is taking the Historic Preservation Division within Department of Land and Natural Resources and moving it out of DLNR, which is Department of Land and Natural Resources. And as we all know, you know, 6 years ago, everyone was very upset about the department, the division, and how they were handling their part in historic preservation. And maybe you can tell people here quickly about the Historic Preservation Division of Department of Land and Natural Resources, state government. What is the state's role in this?
And thank you for drawing that distinction. The state, of course, has regulatory authority over preservation of historic sites, whether those are publicly or privately owned. So the Historic Preservation Division is charged with the day-to-day responsibilities for implementing both the federal and the state laws, which is distinct from Historic Hawaii Foundation, which is more of an advocacy and educational nonprofit organization. We don't approve or deny permits, for example, where SHPD, SHPD, State Historic Preservation Division, they get more involved on that very project detailed level. It's interesting that under the federal preservation law, the National Historic Preservation Act, that set up a state historic preservation officer for each state, for the territories, and for recognized federal tribes. So those historic preservation officers are really mandated under federal law. Now, each state approaches that differently. The way they organize it structurally within their state government is varied. Hawaii is one of only about 7 or 8 states that invests that position, the State Historic Preservation Officer position, in the chair of a large resource management agency. In our case, it's the chair of the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Because that department oversees so many different resources, both natural and historic, there's a division that is specifically charged with historic preservation. Now, there's also the State Parks Division, which has more land management over some historic sites that are state-owned or in the state parks. But the State Historic Preservation Division works with not only the state government, but also all the federal agencies, all of the private property, all owners, all of the counties. So that's really the state agency that's charged with that. The Historic Preservation Division has 3 branches, and each of those branches more specifically focuses on different types of historic resources. So there's the architectural branch, which of course looks at buildings and things like bridges and structures. There's the archaeological branch, which is more about archaeological sites, Native Hawaiian sites, subsurface sorts of resources. And then the culture and history branch, which primarily has responsibility for EV and burials. So it starts to get very, very specific, you know, from the chair of the overall department to the administrator of the division to these branch chiefs to the daily staff that work on these projects and these issues. So all of that is a way to really have experts in these areas bringing their expertise, their professionalism to work with people who are caretakers and responsible for these resources in our state.
Well, it's such an important issue, and I know when I was looking at it and looking, for example, Colorado has history that's 3,000 years old. And, you know, how did they handle it? And it was interesting because they took their historic preservation and they actually attached it directly to the governor, which was really interesting to me. And then that part of it was it had the opportunity for foundation money. It had the opportunity to create museums, historical museums. It also had the oversight of all the archaeological sites at state parks. And what I saw from that, from looking at that, is if you think of historic preservation just as an overreaching, you can see where it taps on different areas. And if, thinking out in the future for historic preservation, is this division pretty proactive in educating and doing like heritage tourism? Is that division, being in Department of Land and Natural Resources, are they confined within that box of the Department of Land and Natural Resources? And that was the challenge for me. Does it need to be elevated at a little bit higher level? So they're talking about museums, they're talking about heritage tourism, they're talking about putting in programs within our K through 12 public schools, or reaching out to our children. Are they promoting within our university careers and career ladders in archaeology, and so is that division too confined? And that was the big question for me.
And it's a great question to ask, because if all we think of preservation as being is review of permits, it really misses the excitement about what it could be, and how it's fundamental to our quality of life, economic development, environmental sustainability, education for the next generation. Really, it should be part and parcel of everything we do as a society. And if you put it in a little box over to the side that's just something that you go through when you want to build something or tear something down, you miss those opportunities to draw those connections. And really, we talk about it in terms of changing an ethic of preservation. Preservation should really be a value that society holds, that's considered equally with other values: sustainability, economics, education, health and wellness, and there's a tie to all of those areas. So one opportunity that I think is coming up in the next year is a statewide preservation plan. And this preservation plan is something that the Historic Preservation Division is charged with developing, but it's not supposed to be a plan for their division. It's supposed to be a statewide policy document that says, here's how we as Hawaii will address our preservation issues. And it's an opportunity to really broaden the conversation and say, well, what about heritage tourism? And what about museums? And what about environmental sustainability? And what about economic development? And what about quality of life? How can we bring all of those different values back into the conversation and have it really be adopted and embraced at all levels of government, by all the different departments and divisions, by the state legislature, by the governors, by the counties, by the planning commissions, by the cultural resources commissions, by the burial councils? How can all of us together be moving towards this broader vision? So this preservation planning effort is being run out of the Historic Preservation Division. There's a working group that Historic Hawaii Foundation is participating in, but there will be public meetings, and there will be many opportunities for the general public to give their input to that process. But to answer your question about the appropriate government structure, is this the right place to put it? I couldn't say whether this is right or wrong. It's certainly been the tradition. And of course, I believe we should not throw out our traditions lightly, but that doesn't mean we can't reevaluate them either and say, is this doing what we need it to do? Is this reflecting who we are and the importance we place on this? And certainly looking at other states and what they've done and learning from their experiences is a viable approach.
Well, I have to say, as a state legislator, I think, asking why, why are we doing it? Why have we done it this way? Is there an opportunity to challenge our thinking to move us forward? Because everything around us is always changing.
Right.
now. Everything's changing. So even our historic sites, putting them in context. And having said that, I mean, I don't think we've mentioned this, but the National